thank you very much to everybody who's joining. My name is Susan Rosney. I'm Sustainability Officer with Chartered Accountants Ireland. And as part of this Ask the Expert series, I've been inviting experts to answer your questions on various sustainability topics. Now, today's topic is green energy, specifically how green is your green energy? So we know that economies urgently need to decarbonise, which means a huge decline in the use of coal, oil and gas in favour of green electricity. Now, a study done last year by UCC and by Microsoft combined discovered that 86% of the surveyed Irish companies have not set any commitments at all on decarbonisation or any targets. And one would wonder why that is the case, certainly because we know that there's many competitive advantages around decarbonisation on top of the urgency which economies have to decarbonise for the Irish Act and for the European Green Deal. So one way of decarbonising is to switch to a renewable supplier, or a supplier rather of renewable electricity. But how do we know if the electricity that we're buying is actually green? So today I'm talking to Cillian Daly, who is a global expert on science-based decarbonisation. So essentially, science-based decarbonisation is using science-based targets for removing carbon emissions from the value chain. Cillian has a degree in energy engineering from UCC, an MBA from Collège des Ingénieurs in Paris, an MPhil in energy technologies from Cambridge. And he's worked at Air Liquide in France, which is the second biggest industrial company in France, and also Total Energies in France before moving back to Ireland and working with Air Data Environmental Services, and is now Executive Director with Energy Tag. Cillian, you're very welcome to Ask the Expert. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
And you have slides, because this beautiful picture that we're looking at the screen is the first of a deck of slides which you've created. And I was wondering, would you take us through those? Because I have some questions that I might interrupt with that have come in, that came in before this, before we went live. So I'd love to see more of these.
Sure, absolutely. So I'll run you through the slides. It's obviously quite a big topic to understand in 15 minutes, but I'll run through some of the key concepts and hopefully it's clear, and happy to follow up with anyone after. Just a word on Energy Tag. So it's a global nonprofit that promotes net zero aligned green claims. We've over 100 supporting organizations, including some of those on the left. And we set the world's first voluntary standard for granular energy tracking and accounting. Okay. So that's what we do, right? We bring together organizations who want to improve green claims and carbon accounting around the world. This is very, very important. Clean grids, clean electricity is the key to unlocking net zero energy everywhere. And companies have a massive role to play there. The commercial industrial sector consumes 60% of the world's electricity. And the role of companies can only be assured if we have proper green claims and carbon accounting and products for them to really take action in a meaningful way, and not in a way that is not meaningful. So it's really, really important we get this right. Today's green claims, you may be unhappy or unfortunate to hear, are disconnected from the realities of what's going on our grids, okay? Basically, grids are happening in real time. It's very much local. Electricity must be deliverable. Whereas the way green certificates are used today to track electricity is done on an annual basis and often on a continental basis. And I'll touch more on that in a minute today. In the next few slides. So today it fundamentally lacks transparency, and it enables 100% renewable claims on paper that are not quite the case in reality. And this fundamentally is because of a loose accounting that we have today, and that's the global norm. It's not just in Europe or Ireland. It's everywhere in the world. We have this issue that must be resolved.
Okay, I'll just bear in mind as well that we as an institute, as a building, have signed up to green electricity. So this is going to be particularly relevant to us as well. So I'll know that, I kind of very much went to the green electricity and then tick that box mentally to say, okay, well, that's done. So obviously there's more, it's more nuanced than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a couple of pointers that you can think about when you're thinking about, well, what is this supplier really giving me? One thing, really just two fundamental laws of electricity is location matters, right? Today, green claims are often made from electricity that could never have been delivered to the consumer. Okay, an Irish consumer can buy a green certificate from Iceland and say, I'm green. Iceland has no interconnection with any country. So no electricity leaves Iceland, but certificates do. Norway is the largest exporter of green certificates in the world, in Europe also, of course. It exports 10 times more certificates than it does actual electricity, okay? So today in Europe, we have a green claiming and accounting system that is not connected to the reality of what's happening on European grids, where there is some level of electricity flowing between countries, but not a lot. And basically what that does is it enables a consumer to say, well, I'm green, I am green, or a supplier to say, I'm giving you green energy, when in fact, they're probably giving you fossil energy and using a certificate to cover over that reality, okay? So location matters.
So an energy company in Ireland could sell you electricity that's generated by fossil fuels, but just buy a certificate that says it's green.
Yeah,
is that okay?
Exactly. Yeah, from Norway, for example.
From Norway, or even from Iceland. Yeah,
that happens all the time. In fact, I would say likely most green, a very significant proportion at least of green supply in Ireland is coming from certificates from outside of Ireland.
Okay.
So that's kind of rule number one is, ask your supplier, where is this coming from? Absolutely. They have the information, but often it's in a kind of a small print at the bottom, but they do have that information. This is a regulated system. Also, time matters. I think we kind of all understand this. If the wind's not blowing, then there's not going to be a lot of wind energy being delivered in reality to consumers. This is an example actually of a Google data center that buys green energy on 100% on an annual basis. Okay. And Google published this themselves because they're working on trying to kind of resolve all of this, right? But what we see is basically in some hours, because it's windy and sunny, they have a lot more green energy than they can consume. And what they do is basically transfer the certificates to the hours where there's not a lot of wind and sun and where there's a lot of fossil power. So on an annual basis, they're 100% renewable. They're RE100. But obviously, when you look in the reality, which is hourly, they're not at all. They're actually fossil reliant in many hours. You can see, in these dark. That's where the black is, exactly. So that's the reality. But they're claiming to be 100% renewable on an annual basis, and this happens wholesale. This happens all the time. And again, it's because of an accounting system that allows you to claim green energy produced at any other time of the year. So you also have situations where I can claim to be powered 100% by solar energy at 3 o'clock in the morning, right? When there's no sun. So that is another issue. Time, location matters. Time also matters a lot. And I think these are two questions you should be kind of asking your supplier, because 100% renewable is really hard. There's actually hardly anywhere in the world where we can do that today, but a lot of suppliers and consumers are claiming that they are. And that's because of kind of these fundamental flaws.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's two. And obviously, this is becoming better known, I would say. So Bloomberg have published some stuff on this recently. What happens when emissions vanish, linked again to these issues that I've just discussed. There's been some research in the Nature Climate Change Journal. Actually, Ireland has been a bit of an international example where the Advertising Authority of Ireland basically has told some suppliers to drop 100% renewable green power claims, which are basically false. So that is not, it's not the only place in the world where this scrutiny has been raised. But I think it's a very good example, at home, where these issues are now starting to be understood, and that people are being marketed green claims and green supply when in reality, it's not what they're really being given. I know that both my parents in Ireland have green tariffs, and actually they're based largely on Norwegian certificates.
And when you say, I suppose for me, I'm looking at the greenwashing aspect of that after doing an event on this a couple of weeks back. And so obviously, we want to do the right thing. We want to purchase these goods and services because of their credentials, and because it's also, in some cases, it's beyond even doing the right thing. It's because we're obliged to, and certainly that'll happen more and more with CSRD coming. So this is kind of almost like an advertising issue that people, I think there is maybe an understanding that our electricity grid is not yet entirely fossil free. And it's only certain times when, like in February, when we're maybe 70% wind, because we can never be at 100% just to keep the grid balanced. But when you are told it's 100% green, you begin to look and say, well, what about that? So that's where I suppose I was coming from it as well. It's like, what exactly is this 100% green power? So this is very interesting to see this is the case. Sorry, continue on.
No, but that is exactly it. You can get 100% green power if the supplier can basically use green power produced at any other time of year or from anywhere in Europe. Then that becomes much easier than if they actually had to supply it from Ireland from local electricity produced in the same hour. Then actually, they wouldn't be able to supply 100%. Yeah.
Could I ask you, just interrupt again? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but did you were saying, like, is it more expensive than to go on a green tariff? When you're saying your parents are both are green tariffs.
There is a premium for that. Yeah, there is.
Whereas in actual fact, it's not necessarily green at all, or it's greener maybe, but it's not 100% green.
It depends exactly where they're taking the certificates from. But yeah, I think in a lot of cases, it's not really contributing to decarbonization in the way that it should. Like, I think most people, the average person, thinks I'm 100% green. They think, okay, I've played my part, my job is done in the energy transition, right? And that's certainly not the case.
Okay. Yep, thanks.
So there's basically a movement, and we're kind of working on that with a number of others, to make accounting track reality. So, to make a green claim, it should be deliverable. It should be from a place where electricity can actually be delivered to you, and it should be in the same hour, unless you've stored the electricity. So yeah, obviously, if you use a battery and take solar power from day to night, then great. That's exactly what you should be doing. But don't pretend to do it just using a kind of a loose accounting. So it's what we call a granular accounting. Okay, this is the new kind of word that's being used to describe this, where accounting goes from annual to hourly and continental to same grid or deliverable. Okay, you still, just one nuance, certificates in themselves actually are needed because we don't have a way of telling, oh, this electricity went from this wind turbine to this consumer. So we need a certification system, but that certification system has to track reality. So it's the certificate in itself is not the problem. It's the boundaries are the problem over which certificates can be claimed. Okay. So that's basically the way things have to go. If we're to have an accounting system that actually reflects, I'm sure you guys know very well from financial accounting, an account should reflect the real status of an organization's performance, right? Whether that be for finance or carbon. And to do that, we need to go this way. Okay. Just to say, obviously, large organizations like the IEA, Princeton University, they're absolutely behind this move to a more granular accounting approach. It's better for the grid, no doubt. Governments are actually starting to use this as well. So the EU is requiring this granular accounting for green hydrogen, okay? Because obviously if you use bad accounting and call green hydrogen green and give billions of euro of taxpayer subsidies, then that's not working really for anyone, right? It's going to increase emissions and it's calling something green that's not. So they've done that. And the US government actually is committed to buy a lot of its electricity using hourly local supply as well. So we are seeing governments move there, and companies, so two corporates in particular, Google and Microsoft, have set targets for 2030 to buy 100% clean power every hour on the grids in which they're based. And I think that's quite a big step from these corporates, and I expect many more to follow as well. That's the next generation of corporate commitment.
Actually, staying with that, Cillian, just when you're talking about the Europe, there's a question in which will this kind of green claims be banned when the Green Claims Directive comes into play? This is the most recent directive that was published by the Commission. So how do you think that will impact?
The Green Claims Directive, it's a little bit nuanced. It doesn't actually, this system that I'm talking about. So the green certificates in Europe are called guarantees of origin. That the EU legislation actually enables this, right? Like, as in, this is not illegal. Nothing is illegal of what I've talked about. It's just because the accounting systems are not very good, and so they need to be changed. The Green Claims Directive, I think, I could see ways in which that could be used to stop a lot of this, but it doesn't specifically ban it, right? It doesn't say we can't do green electricity claims that aren't in the same hour or on the same grid. It doesn't say that, but obviously, in terms of misleading, I would say, consumers, there's certainly evidence to be made that that directive would certainly help prevent some of the more egregious examples, I would say, of misleading green claims.
Okay, great, thanks.
How are we for time?
We've gone over. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
this is really interesting. So, I mean, I'm happy to, I'd love to keep going if you don't, and maybe another 5 minutes.
Sure.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Very happy to do so.
Yeah.
This is my last slide. So then happy to take any questions after. Actually, a lot of this comes down to one document called the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. So this is the carbon accounting Bible, if you would, internationally. 9 out of 10 Fortune 500 companies report using the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. It's also the basis for science-based targets, SBTI, RE100. It's going to be enshrined in law in the CSRD in Europe, and the SEC's climate disclosure in the United States. This is the methodology that must be followed. And today it allows loose accounting. It allows you to make annual claims. It allows you to claim across content. Okay, so that's the status of this document today. It's being changed. So they're actually in the process of reviewing this to ensure it's 1.5 degree aligned, right? So they're aware there's a problem, and now that this is all going to be going into law, I think they acknowledge we need to go towards something that is, really aligned with science, right? Because today's accounting is not. And this will change, fundamentally how companies report their emissions and how they set emissions targets going forward. So this is it's a massively important process, and set to be, taking place over the next 18 to 24 months. It's kicked off already. So I think that was the last kind of thing I wanted to mention. If there are companies on the call or someone who's involved in carbon accounting, scope 2 carbon accounting, getting aware and involved in this process, I think would be really, really important, because it's going to shape how companies make claims and how accounting firms, what standards they audit against, right, when they look at ESG reporting and carbon accounting. So I think that's a really, really important, kind of thing to take away from this. Things are going to change quite significantly on a global level.
That's certainly a theme that we're hearing regarding reporting. You mentioned CSRD there, and I imagine, there's the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures as well, that the UK, it's mandatory for many companies there. And that I'm not 100% sure, but I assume that this is also using the GSG protocol as well, which is based on the science-based targets. And it's
like all roads lead back to this. It's actually kind of a document probably not a lot of people are aware about in many circles, but they'll have heard, almost certainly about, some of the usages of it, whether it be SBTI or A100, they all go back to this. And so, and this sets the accounting rules. And as you know very well, that kind of sets the stage for everything. So very, very important. Yeah,
and so it's very much like so you have the GSG protocol, that's the science-based targets, that's and then on top of the science-based targets, that's what the standards are pointing to. So if you want to get this right, this is where you go. And it's almost like you can't claim to be net zero or to be going to net zero unless you're doing it in accordance with this rule. Otherwise it's just anyone could say anything. But I think one thing that we're certainly seeing with accountants is that nobody is expecting, I think, accountants to become extremely familiar with the ins and outs of the GSG protocol, but what they will need to know is that this exists, and when anybody is advising them or advising clients on their behalf or however it might work, that this is what they need to be looking for. So for instance, somebody approached me recently with a new kind of dashboard, and the first thing I was looking for was like, is the GHG protocol mentioned there, and science-based targets. So I think it's definitely watch the space. We'll see what happens. You mentioned that there's a timeline in this. It's 18 to 24 months of the scope 2 guidance coming out of the GHG protocol, and then we'll keep an eye on the certificate. So my very final question before we have to wrap up, because I appreciate now we've gone a bit over time, is businesses like, so I'm thinking of Chartered Accountants Ireland as a business, as a building. We have our certificates, obviously. Can we still say that we've transitioned to renewable energy? Is that something, I don't want to be lying. Like, what can we as a business do other than ask the questions?
Like, you know, there's nothing preventing you saying that, and there are still common claims. I'm not trying to blame organizations who do this. I'm just saying that the way the accounting is set up is problematic, and it's not science aligned. But you know, I think consumers in general shouldn't be expected to be responsible for you know, for understanding that. You know, I think it's up to others, you know, like us, to push for change there. But I think it is, you know, really important to get engaged in the energy transition, to go out there and try buy green energy. Very important. But I would ask, you know, just ask your supplier the question. You know, 100% renewable. It seems, you know, seems like a big claim. What do you mean by that? Let's unpack that a bit. Where is the electricity coming from? Like, is it being delivered to me every hour, or is that over a year? Like, how could you offer me something a bit more, you know, in line with the realities of the grid today? Yeah, I think having those conversations is definitely important.
Absolutely. And I think, I know you and I have talked about this in the past as well. I mean, should people be looking into getting windmills on their roofs, or should, like, is this better that it's left to the people who manage and operate the grid, or should individuals like me, who doesn't have any background in this, be looking to do some kind of microgeneration? And I know there's a grant for businesses for microgeneration as well as of last year. Is that something that we all should be investigating?
Well, I think, you know, obviously if it's on site, and there's no, this accounting is just when you have a grid, because, you know, it's kind of a common marketplace. Everyone's putting stuff on it and taking stuff off it, and you need to have an accounting system to say who owns what. Obviously, if you build a wind turbine or a solar panel on site, then there's no kind of ambiguity there. That's obviously your green energy when it's producing. So I think, you know, for some businesses in some places with certain levels of resources, that can be an option. I think, you know, in general, electricity renewables as well tends to happen in big scale when it's done by, you know, very large developers, for example, you know, building offshore wind, onshore wind at a kind of a big scale. So I think that will probably remain the major way we build renewables going forward. And I think consumers getting involved and helping them out is going to be really, really important. So, you know, in certain cases, I think having on-site generation is a good thing to look into, and it can make financial sense as well. But also, yeah, it's going to continue. You know, it will continue to be very important to invest in also, you know, larger projects.
And otherwise, I suppose for businesses our size, just ask the questions of your supplier, and keep an eye on like. What most accountants do, or so what all accountants are trained to do, is just have that professional skepticism when you're being given any kind of claim and look at that. So
yeah, 100%, absolutely. Absolutely.
I have loads of other questions to ask, but I appreciate now we're at 11 minutes past the hour. So sorry about that, folks, for those who stayed with us. So thank you very much. Cillian, thanks a million for that. That's really been useful. It's been great to talk to you.
Great.
And for everybody else, thank you for joining us on the Ask the Expert series, and we'll see you again next time. Bye.